And if you're starting a practice from scratch, right, like from absolute scratch, the lease is your biggest potential liability.
Okay,
right?
yeah. So I love this part of the conversation because everyone has probably had to deal with looking at a lease, reviewing a lease, signing a lease, getting screwed by a lease.
Yeah.
So what are some of the biggest doozies that you've seen that landlords have snuck in, or really, maybe tenants have been negligent about when signing a lease?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first one that comes to mind that I see a lot, and this one is like a deal breaker for us, Eugene. Meaning, if a landlord doesn't change this, we ask our client to walk away from the location, and you'll know why when I say what it is.
Hi everyone, Eugene Shatsman here. Welcome to the show. And what a show today. Today's topic I've been really eager to have a conversation about. As you probably know, very recently, the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, issued a ban on non-compete contracts. This is a landmark thing, and it affects 1 out of 5 Americans who are currently bound by a non-compete, and it also renders something like 30 million non-competes that have been signed as just basically worthless paper in a matter of months. I have to tell you, when I read the news, as a business owner, and also as a person who understands how hard our clients work to recruit people, I was blown away. So whether you're outraged about this topic, whether you think it's a good idea, or whether you're just looking to learn more about it, today's show is for you. I bring on attorney Ali Oromchian from Dental and Medical Counsel. He has a niche practice working with optometrists and dentists, and I grill him on this regulation, what it means for you, how it applies in areas where it might not apply. I also get him to talk a little bit about some other topics from a legal perspective, whether it's sneaky clauses you might want to avoid in your lease or tips for buying and selling practices. And then we get back into this non-compete thing and know that now that you can't sign a non-compete with your employees and associates, what can you sign? So this is an action-packed show, and Ali was super generous with some of his advice. And just before we go into the conversation, I want to remind you all to subscribe on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have feedback for me or ideas, or you just want to connect, go to eugeneshatsman.com or to the Power Hour website. I truly enjoy hearing from our listeners, and I'm happy to be a resource for you. And with that in mind, let's get into today's show. All right, Ali, welcome to the show. Excited to have you here on the Power Hour.
Awesome. Thanks, Eugene. Yeah, I'm excited to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
Well, and you have a pretty interesting story from an entrepreneurial standpoint and how you even decided to be an attorney for entrepreneurs. So I'm going to jump into that, and then we're going to get to the big, hairy topic that really, I think a lot of people are wondering about with these non-competes. So tell me a little bit about your background and how you got into what you're doing.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think, I don't know about your story, but for me, I kind of fell into it because I was helping a lot of my wife's classmates and co-residents and whatnot with their offices as they were kind of starting their careers. And then I realized, oh my gosh, this is so much more fun than what I'm doing for the big corporations, and all this other, big law stuff that I was doing. And so just started doing more and more work with, optometrists around the country. And it's been really fantastic because we've really created a reputation nationwide of really promoting practice ownership and entrepreneurship, Eugene. And as you know, when you are coming out of school and you've got all this debt and you've got all this liability as an optometrist, you need to get some experience working for somebody, but at some point you've got to own your own practice. I mean, that's the best way of building wealth and paying down debt and doing all that kind of stuff. And so we're big proponents of that. It's what we do, and we're excited to help promote independent optometrists, around the country. So.
Yeah, that's great. And, I always talk about how you need to have a good team of people on your side, and having people who specialize in what you do is so much better than, the attorney you met at BNI or the person who may have at some point reached out to you because they're part of a large local firm in your area. So no, it's great to have you as a resource. And by the way, for those of us watching on YouTube, are probably going to be wondering, over your right shoulder, there's a bunch of bobbleheads.
Yes.
Just give me a little bit of insight into that.
Yes, yeah, yes, yeah. So my one of my daughters is a huge basketball fan, and she's lucky because she grew up here in the Bay Area, and in the heyday of the Golden State Warriors, being champions, and so we go to a game and she gets a bobblehead and then just like absolutely falls in love with it, and so ever since then, now every year when there is a bobblehead day, we try to get tickets and go. And so we've kind of created a collection of them, over my, on my desk. And like whenever she sees these videos online somehow, she's always so proud. She's like, Dad, you got to put them behind you.
Yeah,
So that collection is going to keep growing. So
that's awesome. That's great.
yeah.
As a slightly upset Cavaliers fan, Cleveland Cavaliers fan, I used to collect the bobbleheads as well when we had a great team worth collecting bobbleheads around.
Yeah. Well,
Until someone took
it's
their talents elsewhere.
yeah,
Anyway,
no, exactly. Well,
so
you've got one championship. That's what matters,
that's
at
right.
least.
I guess that's all Cleveland needs. So, I think one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to leverage your expertise on the show is
Mhm.
because of this recent FTC announcement. And I know that many people listening are folks who have practices, and many people listening are folks who work in practices. And the truth is, any meaningful change to a regulatory pillar like a non-compete is truly transformational in so many different ways in the industry.
Mhm.
And we could argue about it from an economic standpoint. We could argue about it from a cost to a patient standpoint.
Mhm.
I think the obvious place to start, though, is understanding what is this regulation and why is it important. So, and I mean, this really just happened. We're recording this episode in May, and this regulation happened in May, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
let's talk about what took place, and why don't you break it down for us?
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a long time coming, believe it or not. The Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, has been looking to normalize the rule regarding non-competition agreements or provisions across the country. And the reason they wanted to do this, Eugene, is because every state has differing rules when it comes to non-competition. So there are some states like California that have made non-competition provisions and contracts unlawful for decades. I mean, they've compared it to slavery and things of that nature. So it's been unlawful in some states forever. Uh, a lot of states, though, have had rules where non-competition provisions are legal as long as they're quote unquote reasonable, right? And so what does it mean to be reasonable is left for the courts to decide, really, right? And so typically we've seen it anywhere from 2 to 5 miles on the low end to maybe like 10 miles on the high end being sort of reasonable, right? And so there was a big optometry group actually just last week. I got a contract, and one of our doctors sold their practice to this large group, and their non-competition agreement was the entire state of Texas, right? Like literally the entire state of Texas, and it's like, come on, like that's not something that works. It's not even in the realm of reasonableness, and so the states have had all these kind of crazy rules, and so the FTC decided sometime last year that they were going to propose a rule that would normalize this and basically make non-competition agreements unlawful nationwide, right? Make it unlawful nationwide. And so as a result of that, they went through a process. It was supposed to be published and issued last year in the fall, and then that got delayed into November or December. That didn't happen. They took a lot more comments earlier parts of this year, and so we knew it was going to happen sometime this spring to summer. And as you said earlier in May, they published their or they announced that they were going to issue this ruling, and then it got published, and so it goes into effect 120 days from when it was published, which brings it out to, I believe, September 7th. So the rule, and we can go into the details of it, but basically it makes it unlawful for any employer to have any sort of agreement that restricts someone's ability to work after their job.
Yeah, and I mean, let's just really get into that. So that basically means that and let's talk about it from an associate standpoint, but then also office manager standpoint. But let's just say, hypothetically, I
Yeah.
have an employee office manager and an employee associate, and they decide to open up across the street from my practice. Is that now legal?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, after, I mean, not currently, depending on the state you're in, but in September when the rule actually goes into effect, yeah, it will be legal for those folks to resign and then go across the street or downstairs or next door and basically open up their own office and compete against their former employer. So
So
and
I mean, I think a lot of us who, I mean, I think we operate in a world where intellectual property does need to be protected, right? And the way I run my practice, if I'm a typical optometrist, there's quite a bit of intellectual property there, and
yeah,
especially if I'm the senior optometrist teaching my junior associates my way of doing things. Certainly, the last thing I want is someone opening up shop using
right.
my process, my proprietary,
Mhm.
the way I see patients, the way I greet patients, the way I do everything I do, the stuff that's on my frame board. And I believe that previously the idea of a non compete was that, well, at least you couldn't do it and serve the exact same patients across the
Right,
street.
right.
So is there anything that prevents someone from being able to do that? And, can I at least have a non solicitation agreement?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So the rule specifically talks about not allowing anybody to enter into or attempting to enter into a non-compete clause, enforcing or attempting to enforce, some sort of non-compete clause, or representing that someone is subjected to a non-compete clause, right? So then the question is, all right, well, what about non-solicitation, like you said, or protections of intellectual property? How does that work? And so the law is a little bit, vague on how this new FTC rule will apply to these other components of solicitation and intellectual property, and the courts are going to have to figure this out. But basically, can somebody open up next door and steal your patients? The answer is no, right? Not if they, let's say, download the patient data, right, and market to those, right? That would be a HIPAA violation, right? And so there's ways there's things you can put in contracts that protect against, HIPAA violations, for example. But the examples you gave earlier, such as, a way of doing business, a way of marketing, those things are really amorphous, right? Once you learn something, it's hard to unlearn it. And so those things are not going to be able to be protected as easily. How an office greets patients, how they, do certain things, some systems that they may have in place. That's going to be hard to protect, even with a really strong intellectual property contract and whatnot.
Yeah. So I mean, and again, Ali, I'm trying to make sure that I fully understand how business owners can protect themselves, but I'm also, I'm in marketing, so I know that if a patient's been seeing Dr. Shatsman, for example, for 2 years, and Dr. Shatsman decides that he's going to open in Suite 300 instead of Suite 200,
Right.
and advertise on his door that I'm seeing new patients and you can get in faster. My
Right.
patient might go back to the old practice and see a new doctor because I left, or
Right.
the patient might follow me right next door.
A
And
hundred percent.
how do you protect as a marketer? I know how to market how to market that doctor who's leaving, who says, I'm going to open right next door, and I want to show up higher on Google than my previous employer. And so the danger to the previous employer is they've invested so heavily to build that business, to train that associate, to and by the way, apparently I can now take the old office manager, because we had a couple of drinks and decided that it was a good idea, and I was going to pay her $3 more per hour to do that.
Right,
So, what protection does that former practice have from the associate leaving?
Yeah, I mean that I think, Eugene, is exactly what the FTC is trying to eliminate, is to eliminate those protections, right? Is to eliminate those protections, because historically, at least in the FTC's view, this ban will force businesses, or maybe I should say it slightly differently, businesses will no longer be able, right, to use non-competes to prevent employees who are knowledgeable, who have learned things, from departing and competing against them. So if you're relying on a non-compete to protect your intellectual property, this ban will, basically doesn't allow for that to happen anymore. And so what that means is that you have to really think through, okay, how exactly can you protect your trade secrets? How can you actually protect your intellectual property? And those are going to be difficult to do in a typical optometry practice, and so yeah, I mean, I think this is why the FTC got so many comments in favor of it, why we think the lawsuits that have been filed against the FTC claiming that they don't have the power to pass this law, we think those are going to go by the wayside. And even if the courts ruled that the FTC doesn't have this power, we think that Congress will come in and pass a law because there's been so much, favor for it, amongst employees. So
Well, and I think that what I've read, at least, is that the employees who are in favor of it typically work for larger organizations, larger corporations,
yep,
and they want to be entrepreneurs, and they want to be, and they want to, and they don't want to have to leave town to go do something
yeah,
that they like, and it somehow sounds nicer when it's large corporations.
right,
But
right,
at the same time, an optometry practice might be, it might be the senior doctor and the associate doctor,
right,
and it might be I don't know, a 10 person business,
yeah, yeah,
and I still, thinking as I'm advocating for for that position of the business owner that's invested their heart and soul into building this business. I guess you're saying that there are things they can do to kind of protect their intellectual property, which I assume are NDAs. But NDAs traditionally, at least from my understanding, they're pretty tough to enforce.
Well, it's funny you say that. So you're right. I mean, one of the things we see, and most laws are like this, 90% of all HR laws, Eugene, 90% apply to the Fortune 1000, right? The same way they apply to small businesses like OD offices. I mean, think about that, right? Are they worried about child labor in an OD practice? No, right? Right? They're not worried about that.
Right,
They're not
right.
worried about, they're not worried about 15-hour days, in an OD practice, but they are worried about that in these larger corporations. And so these rules get passed for the larger corporations, but the impact is on sort of all businesses, including, of course, OD practices. But you're right. I mean, if an optometrist came to me and said, Ali, I want to do everything I can, right, to protect my trade secrets and intellectual property, what I would say is, okay, let's get a really strong NDA, right, in place, right? And so for those of you that don't know what that is, that's a non-disclosure agreement, of course. You limit access to the employees that you're worried about to different things. Now, in an OD office, that's hard sometimes, but you do that. You require passwords to computer systems. You document access that people have, made into different areas of the database that maybe they shouldn't. And then, and this is really important, you mark information that truly is confidential as confidential or as a trade secret. Okay. And these are ways you can protect it. But like you said, this is stuff that's easy for a Fortune 1000 company to do, right? For an OD practice, that's really tough. To put confidential or trade secret on every patient chart, if it's on paper or if it's electronic, somehow require them to type in a different password to get in. I mean, it's just really tough. But I'll tell you what I think I have seen is, there's a lot of patients for everybody, right? And as a marketing expert, that, patients, come to an OD office because of the doctor, sometimes because of the location, because of, maybe promotions that are there for maybe frame selection, convenience. I mean, these are all reasons that people come, right? And stay, right? If I go to my OD and he's got or she's got an amazing personality and we hit it off, I'm not changing, right? Because I trust them and I love them and whatnot. And as long as they have the frame selection I want and they're convenient and all those things, it makes sense. So I think if you as a doctor is listening and you're worried about your associate leaving, then really there's nothing you can do because we can't, force people to stay. But if you have an incredible experience with your patients, right? If they come in and the patient has an incredible experience with the staff, with the rest of the team, with the opticians, with you, they're less likely to leave if a doctor leaves, right? Because they don't know what they're going to get. So I would just say the challenge is elevate your experience so that the patients really feel that and then don't want to leave even if they could.
Well, I want to ask you, because you alluded in the beginning of the conversation, I'm less educated. I'm still sitting here in my bowl of outrage, thinking about how people are going to steal all of my clients' trade secrets,
Right.
and open up across the way, and that's yet another thing that we have to think about how we protect our clients from. But you said at the beginning of the conversation, California has apparently considered non-compete agreement slavery for a while, and you're in California, and so you tell me more about how has non-compete been even a thing in California, and to what degree has it been enforced, and how has it impacted business, and how is California business different than some of the other things you've seen?
Yeah, no. I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, it's been illegal in California for decades, and it has allowed for a little bit more mobility of employees. But at the end of the day, it is there is risk to opening up your own office. There is sometimes the opportunity is not there. The location's maybe not there, whatnot, and so we don't find it to be a huge problem here. Do associates come and go? Absolutely. Do a lot of them stay if they love the practice and want to become partners and things of that nature? Absolutely. And so, I think, optometrists should expect that, their associates may leave and open up their own shop. But again, if you are paying them well, the experience is incredible, they love being there, a lot of times you can hold on to them. And of course, if you want to make them a partner, sell them 10, 15, 20%, and then they can't leave. And that's the other thing, Eugene, that I want to bring up, not to maybe jump ahead, but, a lot of people mistake this rule as applying to practice transitions or partnerships. And I want to make sure everyone who's listening hears this loud and clear. There is a specific exclusion for when you sell your practice. So when you sell a practice, you're selling goodwill. And as a result of that, the buyer can hold the seller to a non-compete as long as it's reasonable. Okay, so despite this FTC rule, it doesn't impact practice sales. And that makes sense, right? We don't want people to sell their practices for $500,000 and then walk 2 doors down and open up another office, right? And so the law, this new rule doesn't apply to practice sales. It also doesn't apply to partnerships. And so if you are partners in a practice or in a business, you can hold each other to a non-compete. And so basically you're saying, hey, we're partners in this office. You can't go do a sublease at Walmart, down the street, right? Mm-hmm. Or you can't go open up a second office without me, right? Or a dry eye clinic or whatever. Like we have to do it together. And the idea there is, it protects the sanctity of the partnership.
So. I see. So that really creates even more argument for your earlier statement that, give the associates that you're worried about leaving a path to advancement, partnership, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Now, does it have to be formal partnership? Can it be things like phantom equity, or what are the mechanisms that, again, you can kind of apply some sort of non-compete or protect your interests in some way?
Yeah, I mean, a formal buy-in or a formal partnership is definitely better, right? Definitely better. Issuing shares or equity or whatnot typically doesn't escalate to that level, Mm-hmm. And so because you can give stock options and things to people, but it doesn't necessarily translate to sort of a partnership relationship. So from that
perspective, is there a percentage? Okay, can you own half of 1% and still be a partner?
Yeah. So it from the law is a little varied nationwide, but most states say that it's got to be a meaningful interest. They don't say significant. They don't mean majority or anything like that, but a meaningful interest. So because they're trying to avoid what you're just describing, right? If someone being like, "Hey, you own 1/2 of 1%," now you can't compete in the state of Texas. So they try to avoid. They try to make it so that it's a little bit more meaningful. So, but I think 5%, 10%, 15%, anything like that probably is sufficient depending on the state.
Got it. Okay, well, it's an interesting development, and I also think that the development in itself has a tremendous amount of implications and could potentially lead to more private practice startups.
Yes.
Which is probably the topic I should shift to next, because you help people with private practice startups. Yeah. Not that we're, I'm still, just to be clear, I'm still in my seat of outrage about the fact that, my clients have yet another thing to worry about. And at the same time, I also recognize that, some people who are listening to the show are going to be, at some point in their career, are going to be starting a practice. And yep. So you've done, thousands of these, and I wanted to pick your brain a little bit on what are the biggest mistakes people make when starting a practice, and from your vantage point, that's sometimes a really different perspective when you think about legal as opposed to mine, for example, when I think about marketing, or somebody else's when they think about staffing, and so curious to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I mean, I think I never want one of my own practice owners to lose an associate that they care about, or have them go and open up a competing office. It's never fun. It's not great for the relationship and whatnot. But the reality is that more and more people are doing that. More and more people are doing that, and there are the right way of doing things, and then there are some common mistakes that people make. And what I would say a lot of times is, as just a sort of an overarching comment, is that the mistakes are typically not working with industry professionals, right? Not hiring an OD lawyer like me, not going to an optometric lender, not hiring a marketing person like you who specializes on the OD side, not, going to a consultant like Power Practice and helping them kind of hold their hands, like not using industry people, I think sounds good, at a high level, but you miss a lot of things, right? You miss a lot of things. And so, I'll give you an example. We had an office doctor call me and say, I signed this lease. It's been, a couple of months, and the circuit breaker keeps going out, and and I don't know what to do because we're here. It's a beautiful built out office, but there's just not enough power. And so I said, well, okay, let's look at your lease and whatnot. And they had like a friend of theirs help with the lease who did different kinds of law, and they had put nothing in there about the amount of power that the office needed, right? From the landlord. So the panel just was not equipped to handle the amps required to operate all the lights and equipment and everything else in the office. And so it kept getting tripped, and the power kept going out in different parts of the office. And so it's like those little things, Eugene, that make like a huge difference. And if you're starting a practice from scratch, right, like from absolute scratch, the lease is your biggest potential liability.
Okay,
right?
yeah. So I love this part of the conversation because everyone has probably had to deal with looking at a lease, reviewing a lease, signing a lease, getting screwed by a lease.
Yeah.
So what are some of the biggest doozies that you've seen that landlords have snuck in, or really, maybe tenants have been negligent about when signing a lease?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first one that comes to mind that I see a lot, and this one is like a deal breaker for us, Eugene. Meaning, if a landlord doesn't change this, we ask our client to walk away from the location, and you'll know why when I say what it is. But it's called a recapture provision, right? And a recapture provision basically states that upon an assignment of the lease, so that could be selling the practice and selling it to someone else and they take over the lease. It could be bringing on a partner. It could be a sublessee. It could be, because of disability, you have to assign it to someone. It could be any reason. The landlord can take back the space, right? So imagine what that does, right, to someone who is buying or selling a practice to someone, and suddenly the landlord says, you know what, this beautiful office, I'm going to just take it back, right? Well, the value of that practice just goes to zero immediately, right? Because where's the buyer going to see those patients?
Mm-hmm.
And why does the landlord do that? Well, the landlord does it because he knows that he can take that space that he's maybe charging, $24 a year, per square foot, and he's going to turn around and rent it for 50% more because now he's got a built-out optometric practice, right? And and sometimes they lease it back to the buyer, right, of the practice, or they lease it to someone, very closely affiliated with the current practice. But it really kind of impacts the value for sellers, and which is why we never allow those in our contracts. And a lot of doctors listening today may say, well, you know what, I'm young. If I sign this lease, I'm going to be there for 20, 30 years. I'll deal with it down the road, right? Well, that doesn't ever work, right? Because sometimes we have to sell because we move, for family reasons, sometimes for health reasons. There may be a million reasons why things change. We bring on a partner,
Well,
when
in
we don't
20 years
expect
down the
one.
road, the neighborhood could change enough to where you're getting either a great deal and if you're getting a great deal, you're going to be, you don't have any of the leverage to negotiate that
That's
lease
right.
the way that you want it to.
That's right. That's exactly right. So you just have to do everything right from the very beginning.
So recapture provision, give me one more. That's
Yeah.
kind of like this sneak
So
in doozy.
yeah. So CAM charges, which are common area charges for buildings, are usually charged based on a pro rata of the square footage. So in other words, if it's let's say a 50,000 square foot shopping center, and you occupy let's call it 2,500 square feet of that 50,000, you pay 5%, right, of all the common area expenses.
Sure.
That's typically how it works. Well, landlords sometimes will sneak in there language that says that you will pay your percentage not based on the total square footage of the complex, but on the square footage that's rented.
Mm. So if of
Rent.
that 50,000 square feet, only 5,000 is rented out, then I'm paying half the cost of the property tax. I'm paying half the cost of the maintenance for the entire parking lot for whatever.
The whole
And
thing. The whole
yeah, it's
thing.
crazy. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. And these landlords in these retail locations or retail, strip malls or big, they put that language in there, and it's nuts. I mean, you and I have been through what, 4 or 5 different economic like downturns in our careers, right? Between moving backwards, of course, right? You've got COVID, and then you've got the economic crisis, and then you've got the banking crisis, and then you've got the housing crisis, and then you got the dot-com crash. I mean, right? I mean, there are all these moments in our careers where just things have happened and the commercial market has gone to zero. So imagine being an optometrist with your 1,500 square feet office doing $1 million, let's say, a year if you're doing well, and then suddenly you have to pay 50% of the property tax for this huge shopping center. Or
Yeah.
and if you can't, you got to be kicked out. I mean, it's mind numbing. It's mind numbing. So.
Yeah, it's absolutely that's a great one to watch out for, because especially if you're in a mixed use building, right?
Yep.
Because there are sometimes there's offices and retail and residential, and in today's market, retail's doing okay, residential's doing really well, but office space is not doing so well because so many people are working from home.
That's right.
And that's and so you don't want to be on the hook for the costs associated with that space that's not doing well. So that's a really good one to watch out for. I mean,
Yeah.
should I ask you for a third one? Is there another? Is there another one to watch out for?
I mean, there's so many, right? There's so many. There's so many of these that are just mind numbing when you see them, because when landlords go to landlord school, Eugene, their job is to screw tenants, right? And they love nothing more than to take advantage of doctors because they know they're super busy, very smart, of course, but highly inexperienced when it comes to lease negotiations and these kinds of things, and which is why it's important to work with people who not only understand optometry but also understand that side of it, right? And that's why we feel blessed to be able to help young ODs all across the country do this, because we're really watching out for
Well,
them
and
with these
given
kind
that
of things.
you're in the industry, I think one of the other things that you're constantly doing is dealing with transactions, buy and sell transactions.
Yep.
So let's go on the sell side. So if I'm exiting a practice, that means that somebody is buying the practice from me.
Mhm.
And what do I watch out for there? What are again, you've done a lot of these. So let's just do one or two that are kind of interesting things that show up in lots of agreements that you would say, nah, that's not what it seems.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think for a seller, one of the things I think is shortchanging yourself on the sale price. Okay, and and how do you do that? Well, you shortchange yourself by uh, getting valuations done that don't take into account sort of everything that needs to be taken into account from a profit perspective, right? So as you know, when practices are valued on cash flow, which basically means they're valued on profits. So when you go to file your taxes, you're trying to minimize your taxes, which means you try to minimize your profit, right? Show more expenses.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you're selling your practice, you want to show the exact opposite. So
Right.
so you have to find someone who really does a lot of these kind of valuations, and they add back all
Right.
the personal expenses that you've added that really shouldn't be in there, but that you did for the IRS. So I think that is probably one major mistake sellers make. And what's funny is I'll have CPAs and brokers even, right? And the second mistake we're going to talk about is hiring the wrong broker. We'll talk about that in a second. But I'll have these CPAs and brokers say, Ali, why go through this whole exercise, right? It's going to net them an extra $50,000, $100,000. Like, it's not that much money, right? And it always irks me when I hear that, right? Because it's not just $50,000. It's not just $100,000. It's what that money means over the course of the next 20, 30 years when they're in retirement, right? I mean, all the rules, Eugene. Most financial planners say if you invest properly, your money should double every 7 years, right? So think about that, right? If someone retires at 65, 21 years takes them to 86, right? So that means that their money could double 3 times, basically, right? So that 50K suddenly becomes 100, and then it becomes 200, and then it becomes $400,000. I mean, that is significant for someone who's retiring in different parts of the country. Now, if you're in California, you're right. $400,000 may last you a month.
Step one, move.
Yeah, exactly, move. Yeah, but in most of the country, $400,000. I mean, that can last you for a long time.
Yeah.
And that's just for $50,000. Usually, we see a lot more value.
And that's to your point. The other part of those ad backs is, and what I've seen, at least in some of my experience, is that, take your cell phone bill for example, and sometimes it's the cell phone bill and maybe your family's on it, maybe your office manager's on it, whatever. But most that feels like a personal expense. That could also be a business expense that walks the gray line. But if you add it back, maybe that's an extra, $200 a month. What's that? $2,500 a year, right? But that's $2,500 a year. Chances are you're getting a multiple on your practice,
Boom.
Which is then, all of a sudden that $2,500, if you're, getting a 4 times multiple, that cell phone bill just turned into $10,000 in your pocket at the point of exit. Why wouldn't you do that?
Totally, yeah. And that's just with a cell phone bill. Now imagine putting your Range Rover that you're paying $1,200 a month on. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like that's you multiply that by 4 or 5, suddenly that's $50,000. And then, so you're exactly right. That's exactly what I'm talking about. So for sellers, I mean, you can see how passionate I am about this, because this is kind of the things you just don't want to make a mistake about. And
I can tell you don't want your clients getting screwed.
No, never, because man, they work so hard. And I'll tell you, Eugene, my dad, was a doctor, and in his practice, he was your typical old school doctor, right? He did it for the patients. It was a calling, right? It wasn't a job, right? It wasn't a career. It was a calling, right? It was a calling. I mean, that's what doctors are all about. And he didn't care about the business side. And he did fine, right? We had everything we needed as a family. We went to all of our vacations. He drove his cars. Like, everything was fine financially. But you look back now and you go, oh man, what could that have been had you not made some of these mistakes that I know he made, right? Investing in the wrong thing, getting the wrong loan, doing all these things, because it all adds to the profit and to the value of the business, and also to the wealth building that you're trying to create as a family. And so I mean, absolutely. So I think valuations, I think, are first and foremost. And then I know you asked for 2 things, and I would say the second thing for sellers is choosing, if you're going to use a broker, choosing the wrong broker to sell your practice, right? Because they have such an influence on the transaction, right? They have such an influence on the transaction. And I see brokers who have terrible contracts. They don't care about like the HR side of things. And they don't care about the valuations, because, 10% of an extra $10,000 to them is only $1,000, but that $10,000 for our clients is a big deal. So, those kind of things, I think, make a big difference. And I think there's a lot of, you can sell a practice these days, by going out to the network and finding good buyers. And so I think if you're going to use a broker, just make sure you pick one that's good and that gives you good contracts to start with. So.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, good. And
Yeah.
then I guess on the other side of that, if I'm the buyer, what's the biggest mistake you often see?
So I would say there's two things for buyers. One is not doing enough due diligence on the practice, right? Not looking at the data. Like one of the things that I think is super important is to hire a consultant to go in and do a true analysis of the practice.
Yeah,
Right?
things aren't always what they seem.
Exactly. When, have you ever bought a home, Eugene? You know how that experience goes. You walk through with your spouse and you go, oh, well, this is nice, but I would change this, right? And I would change that. It's unless you build your own home, you will never find a house that has everything exactly the way you want it, right? And that's what I always tell my young doctors who are buying practice. They go, you're buying someone else's home, right? So it's not going to be exactly the way you want it in many ways. And sometimes there's bodies buried in locations you don't know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and so what you got to do is you got to hire a consultant to kind of come in and basically do that analysis for you and tell you, hey, this is what the status of this office is like. This is how many new patients they're getting. This is, what is happening as far as, the eye exams. And, are they getting the eye exam and then buying the frame somewhere else? Or are they getting an eye exam and buying the frames there? Do we have, getting all that information and then analyzing it and then deciding, what you're going to do about it. And a lot of, sometimes brokers get mad at me because I introduce, the consultants into the transaction, and they go, "Oh yeah, no, these consultants are gonna ruin the transaction. Right? They're gonna tell this buyer all the things that are wrong with the practice." And I always tell them, I go, "Look, that's the whole point. We want the buyer to know everything about the practice that there is, because if they know what's wrong with the practice, it doesn't mean they won't buy it. What it means is that once they buy it, they know what to do to fix it."
Yeah, and
Right?
my take on that, and it's exactly you're totally speaking my language, because I always tell our clients, hey, let us know if you're considering buying someone, and we'll do the full marketing analysis on that practice.
Yes.
And the crappier that marketing analysis comes back, the bigger your opportunity, right?
Exactly.
You want to buy that practice. You don't want to buy the practice if their marketing analysis comes back perfect and there's no more juice left to squeeze out of whatever fruit you're trying to squeeze it out of. But if it turns out that their SEO is in the tank and their recall system doesn't work, and it turns out that they're the way that they're communicating with their patients is using an AOL.com email account. These are all good news for you in many cases,
Right.
because that all just spells opportunity.
That's right. Yeah. Eugene, that's exactly right. That's what it's like it's the essence of buying low and selling high.
Yeah, of course.
Right. And so you're exactly right. And so brokers get scared by that. But like you said, the more information buyers have, the better off they are. And the marketing analysis you just described, the consulting due diligence that consultants do, all of that is just more info. So I think a lot of times buyers are afraid to spend the money and invest in those due diligence reports because they're like, I don't want to spend a couple $1,000. I don't want to. Yeah, it's like, it's an investment in your planning. Now you know what you're buying. And I always compare it to like buying a used car. Nobody in their right mind, unless they're a mechanic, would buy a used car without taking it to a shop.
Sure.
Why don't you do that with a practice?
Yeah.
So that's the number one thing. And then the second thing, which is very near and dear to my heart because of HR for Health, of course, is, the number one threat to young doctors is not malpractice, it's HR lawsuits. Okay. And ignoring HR and not hiring the employees correctly, not getting an employment manual, not doing benefits correctly, not doing all the things that they need to do from an HR perspective is a huge miss that people, again, underestimate. And they'll like, oh yeah, I'll do it later. And then they never do it later. And then they get sued or get in trouble. And so I always say, just jump on HR for Health, get all of your systems in place from day one, and then you can put it on auto drive and never look back. So the HR side is the second thing.
Yeah, that's great. And as I try to circle back to our original topic, I know we veered off in a very productive way off the initial course of this FTC ruling. The other thing I thought about was, well, if I have associates in my practice, it might be time to sharpen the pencil, because now that I'm getting over my initial, what do I call, like, punch in the gut that, hey, these non-compete agreements are going to be invalid, right? Okay, so let me sharpen the pencil and get your advice on, what should be in my agreements with my associates to make sure that, again, I'm doing the best to support them, to support their career, but at the same time to protect my business interests.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think everyone needs, when they hire associates, they need an employment agreement for sure for the associates. But they're probably the only people in the office that need an associate agreement. Everybody else can be managed by an employment manual, right? That will govern a lot of the same non-disclosures, right, and confidentiality provisions and things of that nature. But the employment agreement should spell out how they're compensated very clearly, should talk about what's confidential and not confidential, should have HIPAA, OSHA language, if need be. And I think, detailing their benefits and things of that nature in it is always very helpful, right? It's always very helpful. And because this FTC ruling will make these non-compete provisions unlawful, there's no reason to put them in there and try to scare the associate, because there's going to be penalties attached to even having it in contracts, right? And so I think if you're doing that level of language in the associate agreements, and you've got it clearly delineated about what's confidential, what's not, what do you expect from them, you're gonna be okay. You're gonna be okay. Is it 100% proof or 100% protection, I should say, that they're going to never leave and never? No, of course not. But there's nothing we can do about those.
Yeah. Well, I understand, and I'm super grateful for all of your insights today, Ali. I think that you've been an incredible resource, and I tried to, I tried to ask you the stuff that most lawyers won't tell you. So I appreciate you kind of playing ball with me and sharing some of the I guess maybe behind the scenes insights.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah.
As I think about as we wrap up, I think just going back to this FTC ban on non-competes where we started the show, it seems like your attitude towards it is it's not that big of a deal. Go ahead and kind of give us your parting thoughts on this, and and again, what action should I take if I realize that along with the other 30 million non-compete agreements, the one that I have with the people in my practice is going to be invalid in September?
Yeah. I've learned over the years, especially being, in a state like California, that there's almost nothing you can do about these rules being implemented other than voting, appropriately. And so to me, we just have to deal with it. And if it's being thrown at you and you're worried about it, just make it really hard for them to leave, right? Make your office the best office that they could ever work at, and make sure they know that the grass is not greener on the other side, and because it's not a lot of times, right? People think it is, and then they go and they realize, holy cow, this is not as good of an office as I was at. And so I think it's rolling with the punches, getting a contract that is strong, but doesn't violate this new FTC rule, and then focusing on growing the business with the right marketing strategies, the right consulting strategies. Those, I think, will, surpass anything else. So,
All right. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us today, Ali. I
my
know the
pleasure.
listeners appreciate it, and I'll make sure to post in the show notes all the ways that people can get a hold of you. Make sure you get me those links. And again, hopefully we can bring you back on in the future as more information evolves around this, what I'd call somewhat controversial regulation.
Absolutely, yeah. It'd be my pleasure to come back, and thanks again for inviting me. And next time, I want to see a bobblehead of you in the back there. Yeah.
You know what? That might be a cool idea. I'll send you your own microphone bobblehead of you and I doing the show.
Exactly. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
All right, Ali. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Eugene. Thanks, everyone.
If you're enjoying the Power Hour, you might be asking yourself, what can I do today in my practice that's going to make an impact? So over the years, the practice coaches and consultants at the Power Practice have helped thousands of practices improve. And they often start with one thing, and that's a proprietary methodology called the Practice Profitability Audit. For about $2,400, they look at all of your practice numbers and they stack them up against where a practice of your size could and should be. It takes about a week for them to do. And because they're so experienced, they know what your potential looks like. And they're often able to take that $2,400, multiply it several times over, and hand it right back to you in found profits in your practice in months, not years, in months, but you get to keep the much more profitable practice for years afterwards. But here's the best news. I'm going to tell you how you can have the Practice Profitability Audit completely free. See, we're really trying to get people onto the show website, which is, by the way, powerpractice.com. And then you click the Power Hour podcast button. The reason we want you there is because I want the audience participation. I want to hear your feedback, and I want to know how to make the show better for you. So you can interact with us, send us your feedback, offer your suggestions. And for a limited time, when you go there, you can also request a practice profitability audit for free. Right. We're going to cover 100% of the cost, but only for 5 people per month. And 5 people per month is all we really have capacity for, because this is a resource intensive audit and the Power Practice coaches are generally busy serving their clients. But for 5 people a month, they've agreed to cover 100% of the cost. So it's totally free to you. So again, take action immediately in your practice. Go to powerpractice.com, click on the Power Hour podcast, interact with us, but also request a practice profitability audit today.